A little girl named Lily appeared innocently asking and then whispering, "Can you be my mother forever?" A statement that left Evelyn choked up. Evelyn Harper had never known silence to weigh so heavily. The shrill whistle of the departing train still echoed faintly in the distance, but its smoke had already vanished into the horizon. What lingered instead was the ache of abandonment. She stood alone on the wooden platform of a remote Dakota Territory station, her carpet bag gripped tightly in her gloved hands. The autumn air carried the sting of frost, and her breath hung in pale clouds before her face. Around her, the last of the passengers had already been met by relatives or merchants, swept away in laughter embraces or hurried errands. No one had come for her. Again, the platform emptied until she was left with the creak of timbers beneath her boots and the dry rasp of wind sweeping dust across the tracks. She lowered herself onto a rough bench, its surface splintered from years of sun and storm. The wood pressed hard into her spine, but she did not move. Pride had kept her upright for so long, yet tonight even pride felt hollow. Slowly, she drew a folded letter from the pocket of her coat. Its edges were worn soft as though it had been touched and reread 100 times. She had memorized every line. "I have a quiet home, a warm hearth, and a place for a kind soul to belong. Come to me and you will never be alone again." It had been signed James Colton, a name she had carried like a fragile promise. But no wagon awaited her. No lantern held aloft in welcome. Only silence. 2 men leaned against a barrel nearby, their voices low at first, then louder when they noticed her. Well, now one sneered the half-breed schoolteacher thought she'd catch herself a rancher, did she? Their laughter echoed across the empty platform. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she did not respond. She had heard worse. 3 times she had nearly married, 3 times humiliated, once abandoned in private, twice left standing where the whole town could see. The whispers always returned. "She's not one of us. Her mother was taken, her blood is tainted." The words stung like nettles, branding her with shame she could not wash away. She had tried to build respect by opening a small lending library teaching soldiers' children to read mending uniforms for widows. Yet gossip followed her like a shadow, persistent and cruel. Tears burned hot behind her eyes. She had not wept in front of anyone in years, but that night she bent her head, shoulders trembling as the letter crumpled in her lap. The sound of small footsteps broke through her despair. When she looked up, a child no older than 3 stood before her. A wool coat, far too large, swallowed the girl's frame, its sleeves dangling past her mittens. Golden curls peeked out beneath a knitted cap, and her wide blue eyes shone with worry. "Are you hurt?" the child asked softly. Evelyn swiped at her cheeks with the back of her sleeve. "No, darlin', just a little sad." The girl tilted her head, studying her as though sadness were a puzzle to solve. "Did your daddy say no?" A weak smile flickered across Evelyn's face. "No, sweetheart. I just don't have a husband." The child's brow furrowed in deep concentration. "Do you have a baby?" Evelyn shook her head. "Nobody wants me." The confession slipped out before she could stop it, raw and unguarded. The girl stepped closer, reaching out her mittened hand to touch Evelyn's fingers. Then she paused, her voice full of a certainty only innocence could carry. "Can you be my mommy forever?" Evelyn froze, her breath caught in her throat. The question was so unexpected, so tender, it nearly undid her. Before she could speak, a deep voice cut through the stillness. "Lily." Evelyn lifted her eyes. A man approached with quiet steps. His broad shoulders stooped beneath a weathered coat. His hat bore the wear of long rides, and his boots were cracked from years of labor. He carried a sack of supplies in one arm, and his other hand rested gently on the child's shoulder. His face, though handsome, carried lines carved by grief. "She's got a soft heart," he said, his tone more apologetic than scolding. Evelyn rose quickly, brushing her skirt. "No trouble. She only surprised me." His eyes lingered briefly on the crumpled letter still in her hand. "You waiting on someone." Evelyn hesitated, then admitted I was, but it seems I've been fooled again. He nodded slowly, as though the admission was one he understood all too well. The little girl tugged at his coat. "Papa," she whispered, her eyes fixed hopefully on Evelyn. The man's jaw tightened. He looked from his daughter to Evelyn and back again. "You've got no place to stay, do you?" Evelyn straightened her shoulders. "I'll manage." His gaze held hers for a long moment, unreadable, yet not unkind. Then he shifted the sack to his other hand. "It's cold out. If you want a roof and some warm broth, you're welcome to rest a while." Evelyn blinked at the unexpected offer. "I don't even know your name." "Thomas Granger," he replied. He gestured toward the narrow path that led away from the station into the dusky hills. "It's not far. You can leave after supper if you choose." She glanced down at Lily, whose small hand still clung to her own, as though it had already found its answer. Evelyn's heart tightened. She had not come looking for a child. She had not even been welcomed by the man she'd hoped for. Yet here was a little girl who saw her not as shame, but as possibility. Evelyn gave a single nod. "Thank you." And with that, she gathered her carpet bag and followed Thomas and his daughter into the gathering dusk. The sky deepened to violet above the pines, and the chill of night settled around them. Evelyn did not walk with hope, but with the faintest flicker of warmth like a match lit against the wind, fragile but alive. Behind them, the empty platform faded into darkness, and with it the echo of cruel laughter. Ahead, uncertain but beckoning, lay the glow of a cabin's fire. For the first time in years, Evelyn wondered if her story might not yet be finished. The trail that wound toward Thomas Granger's cabin was narrow-edged with sparse pines and crumbling hills that caught the last blush of sunset. By the time they reached the homestead, dusk had deepened into violet shadows. Smoke curled thinly from a stone chimney, the scent of pine wood drifting in the cold air. The cabin itself was small, scarcely more than one room with a slanted porch, its boards worn smooth by wind and weather. Yet the sight of it stirred something Evelyn had not felt in weeks, a trace of safety. Thomas pushed open the door with his shoulder, letting Lily dart inside first. A fire already glowed in the hearth, casting long golden beams across the plank walls. Evelyn hesitated at the threshold, one hand gripping her carpet bag tightly. She had known many doorways, boarding houses, rented rooms, borrowed space in other people's kitchens, but never one that seemed to ask for nothing in return. "You can hang your coat there," Thomas said, nodding toward a wooden peg hammered into the wall. He tugged off his hat and shook the dust from his boots. Evelyn set her bag near the door but left her gloves on. "I won't stay long." "That's up to you," he replied without looking at her. "I didn't ask you here forever, just for the night." Heat rose to her cheeks, though his tone was not cruel. It was simply honest. She was unused to such plainness. Most men she had met had offered honeyed words that dissolved into disappointment. While Thomas busied himself with the pot over the fire, Evelyn let her gaze roam the cabin. It was sparse but clean. A narrow bed was tucked into the far corner. A small table stood beside a rocking chair worn shiny on its arms. Yet it was not the furniture that caught her breath. Against the wall, half hidden behind folded blankets, hung a tiny dress beaded in delicate patterns, the kind worn by Comanche girls. On a shelf beside it rested a string of turquoise, a feather bound with red sinew, and a pouch of dried sage. Evelyn stepped closer, her fingers hovering. She was Comanche, she whispered. Thomas's voice came from behind her. Her name was Weena. She died last winter. Fever took her quick. Evelyn's heart tightened. "I'm sorry." He gave no reply, only stirred the stew with a heavy wooden spoon. His silence was not cold, but it was layered like the rings of a tree, showing years of storms endured. Evelyn turned back to the fire, uncertain what was permitted to be said in this house. Lily clambered up onto the bench near the hearth and patted the seat beside her. "You can sit here," she said brightly. "It's warmest." Evelyn managed a small smile and sat careful to keep her gloves on. The child hummed tunelessly while swinging her legs, filling the cabin with a cheer that softened the edges of Thomas's silence. They ate supper with few words spoken. Thomas offered bread and stew. Evelyn accepted with a nod. The only conversation came from Lily, who giggled at her own slurping and offered Evelyn the choicest bits of carrot from her bowl. For a while, Evelyn felt a strange comfort in the simple act of sharing a meal, though her heart still carried the weight of betrayal. Afterward, she stood to gather her things. "Thank you. I should be going." But before she could reach the door, Lily rushed forward and clung to her skirts. "No," she cried. "You said you don't have a house. This one can be yours for a little." Evelyn knelt her hands gently, prying the child's grip. "Sweetheart, this isn't my house." Lily's lip trembled, her wide eyes brimming with confusion. Evelyn glanced up helplessly at Thomas. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "She gets attached fast," he muttered. Evelyn straightened. "I can sleep in the barn, or by the fire, just tonight." Thomas studied her a moment, then gave a slow nod. "Take the cot. I'll stay up." Evelyn opened her mouth to protest, but the look in his eyes silenced her. This was not pity, it was protection, and perhaps he needed to give it as much as she needed to receive it. Later, as Lily drifted into sleep curled beside the family dog, Evelyn pulled a blanket around her shoulders and sat by the small window. Frost crept along the glass, silvering its edges. The fire popped softly behind her. Thomas sat in his chair, arms folded, his gaze fixed on the embers. After a long silence, he spoke, his voice low. "I didn't write you any letters." Evelyn turned, startled. "What?" "That name, James Colton. He's a stable boy. 17. Thinks himself clever. Probably thought it'd be a joke to send a stranger a promise he couldn't keep." The words struck her like a blow. Her shoulders sagged, shame and fury swirling together. "So I came here for nothing," she murmured. Thomas's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more. The fire crackled between them, filling the silence with its restless voice. Evelyn stared at her hands clenched tightly in her lap. How many times must I be fooled? Yet before despair could take her fully, Lily stirred and rolled against her side, her small hand curling trustingly into Evelyn's. That touch undid her. She let her eyes close, not in defeat, but in the smallest measure of comfort. Near midnight, Thomas rose and added another log to the fire. His movements were quiet, deliberate. When he spoke again, it was almost an afterthought. "You can stay a few days. She sleeps easier with you here." Evelyn looked at him through the glow of the flames. "That's all right," she said softly. "I won't ask for more." He gave a brief nod and returned to his chair. Neither spoke again. Yet the silence no longer felt like emptiness. It was different now, weighted, uncertain, but not cold. The firelight painted the cabin in shifting gold, and the place no longer seemed made for one. Evelyn drew the blanket tighter around her shoulders, listening to Lily's even breaths. She had not been chosen by a husband that night, but she had been chosen in some small way by a child. And that, perhaps, was the first step toward something she had never dared to hope for. Morning broke pale and brittle, the frost crusted thick along the windows. Evelyn rose stiff from the cot, her shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Thomas was already outside, splitting wood with the practiced swing of an axe. Lily chased the dog in the yard, her laughter muffled by the cold. For the first time in months, Evelyn did not feel entirely like a stranger to the world. Yet she reminded herself sternly this was temporary. Nothing more. Days passed in a rhythm that surprised her. She helped with small chores, mending Lily's dress, sweeping the porch, stirring the stew when Thomas fetched water. At night, she told Lily stories from the old books she had once read to soldiers' children, fairy tales that made the little girl giggle and fall asleep with her hand curled around Evelyn's sleeve. The house, which had felt silent and somber on her first night, slowly began to carry the hum of ordinary life. But it was not until the fever came that everything changed. It began with a shiver. Lily had danced barefoot in the meadow that morning, twirling until her cheeks flushed pink. By evening, she lay curled on the cot, her face slick with sweat, her small body trembling. Evelyn was at the hearth, sorting herbs from her satchel, when Thomas's voice broke with panic. "She's burning up," he muttered, pressing a wet cloth uselessly to the child's forehead. His usually steady hands shook. "I don't know what's wrong." Evelyn was beside them in an instant, her own palm resting on Lily's hot skin. The fever pulsed like fire beneath her touch. She kept her voice calm, though her heart tightened. "It's bad. She needs care now. Can we take her to town?" Thomas asked, his voice taut with desperation. "Not tonight. The roads are ice and she won't last the trip." Evelyn met his eyes. "But I can help her here." Thomas froze, searching her face. "How?" "My father was a healer among the Kaya people. He taught me the herbs, the teas, the poultices, things that work when nothing else does." He hesitated only a moment, then nodded sharply. "Do it." Evelyn moved swiftly, her fear locked deep beneath focus. She reached for bundles of dried roots and leaves, crushing some into paste, steeping others in boiling water. The cabin filled with the sharp tang of sage willow bark and bitter herbs. She worked with hands steady and sure, placing a cloth soaked in medicinal tea upon Lily's chest, rubbing another mixture across her temples. "She must sweat the sickness out," Evelyn explained quietly. "If she does, she'll break the fever by morning." Thomas hovered at the girl's side, helpless. "She's all I have," he said hoarsely. Evelyn looked up briefly, the weight of his words pressing into her. "She'll pull through. She has to." For hours they remained by Lily's side. Evelyn coaxed bitter sips of tea past the child's lips, whispered lullabies in a language Thomas did not understand, wiped the sweat that rolled down her flushed skin. Thomas could do little but sit and watch his chest rising with shallow breaths, his eyes never leaving his daughter. Every so often his gaze drifted to Evelyn, her calm, her determination, the gentleness in her touch. Something shifted within him, a thread drawn taut, where grief had once severed all ties. Near midnight, Lily stirred. Her lashes fluttered and her small fingers fumbled in the dark until they caught Evelyn's hand. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice faint as smoke. Evelyn froze. Thomas inhaled sharply. For an instant the room held no sound but the crackle of the fire. "She doesn't understand," Evelyn murmured, her throat tight. But Thomas's voice was quiet, almost reverent. "She knows what feels safe." They said nothing more. Lily slipped back into sleep, her tiny hand still clasping Evelyn's. The fire burned low, the cabin wrapped in a silence that was no longer empty, but full of unsaid things. When morning came, Evelyn dozed stiffly by the hearth. She woke to find a cup of coffee on the table, freshly poured, waiting for her. She blinked in surprise, then looked toward Thomas. He did not speak, but the gesture said enough. Later that day, as Lily slept more peacefully, Evelyn stepped onto the porch. The sky stretched endless and pale, the prairie winds carrying the scent of dry grass and cedar. Thomas stood at the railing, his gaze on the tree line. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, Evelyn broke the silence. "She asked me again tonight," she said softly. "Lily." Evelyn nodded. "She wanted to know if I had a mother. I told her about the woman who raised me, who held my hand when I cried, who sang to the stars like they were her sisters. She wasn't my birth mother, but she loved me like I was her own." Thomas glanced at her, brow furrowed. Evelyn continued, her voice steady but worn from years of retelling. "My real mother died when I was born. She was taken during a raid. My father was a cavalry officer. Some say he meant to return, others say he was drunk. I never knew him. The tribe kept me. Not all wanted me there, but an old woman raised me. I learned to read, to sew, to heal. But still whispers followed. Half-blood, outsider, a reminder of things best forgotten." Her eyes drifted toward the horizon. "I thought if I married I could outrun it. But men wanted a wife without history. When they learned mine, they turned away. Thomas was quiet a long time before speaking. I knew a man once who said blood tells the truth of a person. Evelyn gave a weary smile. Do you believe that? I did, Thomas admitted. His gaze softened as it turned back to the sleeping child inside. Until I had a daughter whose skin was darker than mine, and the world told me she was less than whole. But she's the best thing I've ever done. Evelyn's throat ached with unspoken tears. For the first time in years, she did not feel like she had to explain who she was. He had simply listened, and in the fragile quiet that followed, something stronger than survival began to take root. Winter pressed harder against the Dakota plains, the winds slicing sharp and dry across the fields. Inside the cabin, however, a new rhythm had settled. Days blended into each other with a quiet steadiness. Thomas cutting wood or checking traps, Evelyn mending clothes or drying herbs, Lily's laughter threading through it all. What had begun as a reluctant refuge was turning into something else, a fragile but undeniable home. Evelyn had not planned to linger yet. Each morning she found a reason to stay. Sometimes it was Lily's insistence that she read one more story. Other times it was the way Thomas left small signs of acceptance. A chair pulled close to the fire for her, a sharpened knife handle smoothed for her smaller grip. Their exchanges were simple, almost clumsy, but something wordless grew between them. One evening, as Evelyn stitched a patch onto Lily's dress, Thomas sat across from her, quiet but not withdrawn. The fire glowed between them, its warmth casting a fragile peace. At length, he spoke, his voice rough. She used to sing when the snow came, he said. Evelyn looked up. My wife, Weena. He kept his gaze on the window, where frost crept along the glass. Her name meant quiet moon. She laughed at me with her eyes even when her mouth didn't. We didn't speak the same tongue at first, but we built a life. And then, one winter, I came home too late. The words fell heavy. He told her how he had left for supplies, how neighbors with hatred in their eyes had come, how they had torn apart the small pieces of his wife's world, how they had dragged her outside. Said she was infecting the bloodline. He muttered, jaw rigid. I buried her under the cedar tree. And after that, I stopped choosing love. I chose survival. Evelyn's throat tightened. I understand, she whispered. I didn't come here to find love either. I only wanted a place where I wouldn't have to apologize for still being alive. Their eyes met across the flicker of firelight, and for the first time there was no wall between them. Not romance, not yet, but the recognition of two souls who had been left behind and yet endured. That fragile peace nearly shattered the following week. The wind had shifted colder, a whisper of snow hidden in its breath. Evelyn had just hung a blanket to dry when she noticed the yard was too still. No laughter, no dog yapping. Her stomach dropped. Lily, she called, scanning the field. No answer. Panic surged hot and sharp. She spotted the gate near the tree line hanging open, swinging in the wind. Heart pounding, she sprinted toward it, boots crunching across frozen earth. Tiny footprints led toward the creek. Then a splash, a high scream. Evelyn's blood froze. Down by the stream, Lily thrashed in the icy current, her small hands clawing for a branch as the water pulled her under. Evelyn didn't think she dropped her shawl, waded into the freezing torrent, the water stabbing into her chest like knives. Hold on, sweetheart. I've got you. The child's cries broke into gasps as the current dragged at her. Evelyn lunged, seizing Lily beneath the arms, heaving with all her strength. With a final desperate shove, she pushed the girl onto a half-submerged rock. Stay there. Don't let go. But as Evelyn tried to retreat, her foot wedged between two hidden stones. She kicked, pulled, fought, but the current clawed at her limbs. Numbness spread up her legs, her arms heavy as lead. Her breaths grew ragged, shallow. The last thing she saw was Lily's pale, terrified face before the darkness swallowed her. Thomas returned to the cabin just as the scream carried on the wind. Dropping his bundle, he ran, without thought, boots tearing through the snow. The creek came into view, and his heart nearly broke. Lily sobbing on the rock, Evelyn limp in the current. He plunged in the water, slicing up to his thighs, but he didn't feel the cold. He seized Evelyn first, dragging her body against his chest, then reached for Lily, lifting her to safety. "It's all right. I've got you. I've got you both," he whispered, though his voice shook with fear. Back at the cabin, the fire roared high as Thomas worked desperately. He stripped the soaked clothes from Evelyn's body, wrapping her in every blanket he owned, his hands trembling. He pressed her against him, body to body, whispering fiercely, "Stay with me. Come back. Please don't leave." He didn't cry, but his voice broke as he repeated it like a prayer. Hour after hour, he fed the fire-rubbed warmth back into her limbs, refusing to let her slip away. At last, near dawn, Evelyn stirred. Her lashes fluttered her lips, blue but alive. Her first hoarse whisper was Lily. "She's safe," Thomas said quickly, brushing damp hair from her face. "Because of you." Her body shook violently, but she managed a faint reply. "I couldn't let her go." "You didn't," he said, voice cracking. His hand cupped her cheek. "You saved my daughter. You nearly died. Why would you do that?" Evelyn met his gaze, her eyes raw with exhaustion. "Because she needed me, and I needed her." For a long moment, Thomas could not speak. Finally, he whispered, "Don't ever leave again. Please." Her weak fingers curled around his hand. "I wasn't planning to." The following days blurred into recovery. Evelyn lay weak by the fire, Lily curled beside her like a shadow. The child asked again, her voice solemn, "Will you be my mommy forever?" This time, Evelyn did not flinch. Tears burned her eyes as she whispered, "Yes, baby. If you'll have me, I will." Lily nodded fiercely and snuggled closer as though sealing a sacred vow. Thomas overheard it all from the doorway. He said nothing, but his chest tightened with a hope he had not dared feel since Weena's death. That evening, snow fell soft and silent over the cabin. Evelyn stepped onto the porch wrapped in a shawl. Thomas stood there already, his breath misting in the cold. They didn't speak at first. Then he cleared his throat. "I don't have silver rings or preacher's vows," he said haltingly. "I've only got this porch, a fire that doesn't always stay lit, a fence that still needs mending. But if what you want is a place to stay, if what you need is not to be alone, then I've got that. I've got her. And I want you too, if you'll let me." Evelyn's heart clenched. She reached for his hand, her voice steady despite the tears. "I don't want just a roof. I want a family." For the first time in years, Thomas's guarded eyes filled with something unbroken, something like hope. And in that moment, beneath the falling snow, the three of them were no longer broken pieces, but the beginning of a whole. The seasons turned again, and with them the shape of life within the Granger homestead. What had once been a lonely cabin, tucked into a hollow, now brimmed with warmth and motion. A second room had been built by Thomas's steady hands, shelves lined with jars of herbs and remedies prepared by Evelyn, and laughter spilled out of the doorway where once only silence lived. Nearly a year had passed since Evelyn first stepped off that train platform with nothing but a crumpled letter and a heart bruised by rejection. Now she stood at the same threshold of the cabin, one hand resting against the swell of her belly. She was heavy with child, her back aching in that soft way that spoke of life waiting to arrive. Behind her, Lily's bright voice rang through the house, humming a tune Evelyn had taught her while she stirred dried lavender into a satchel for the neighbors. Evelyn smiled faintly. It still astonished her sometimes that a woman who had been told all her life she was unwanted now lived in a place where every sound, every gesture spoke of belonging. At first, the town had kept its distance. Whispers carried to the trading post. "That's the half-breed woman. That's the widower with the Indian child." But slowly, small cracks formed in their suspicion. A mother with a sick child came quietly one evening, asking if Evelyn knew any remedies. Then another and another. Men with aching joints asked for teased children curious about letters gathered at the cabin steps with scraps of paper and charcoal. Evelyn never turned anyone away. She taught, she healed, she listened. The sign Thomas carved and nailed above the porch read simply, "Harper and Granger, Herbs and Help." It was not just a cabin anymore. It was a home that stretched outward where those who had once whispered found themselves knocking at the door. Thomas remained a man of few words, but his actions spoke in ways louder than speech. He built benches outside the cabin for neighbors waiting their turn. He sharpened tools in quiet exchange for honey or cloth. Yet, when it came to Lily, his voice softened rich with light. He was still scarred, still carrying the shadows of grief, but each day with Evelyn and Lily had begun to turn those scars into something steadier, something like peace. And today, beneath a sky brushed in amber clouds, something long overdue was about to happen. There would be no preacher, no church bells, just the wide field beyond their home, the sycamore tree where Lily once danced in the snow, and a handful of neighbors who came not with judgment, but with baskets of bread and jars of honey as gifts. Evelyn wore a dress she had sewn herself, soft brown cotton trimmed with lace. Her dark hair was braided neatly, a single feather tied near the end, a quiet nod to her mother's people. She carried no bouquet, only the memory of every rejection she had survived, and the strength of knowing none of it defined her any more. Thomas waited for her beneath the tree, his hands trembling despite all the battles he had faced in life. He had fought through war, faced down rifle barrels, buried the woman he loved. But this moment, watching Evelyn walk toward him with Lily at her side, made his knees weak. Lily bounded ahead, carrying a clutch of wildflowers, her grin so wide it seemed to split the horizon. She handed them to Evelyn before skipping between them, eyes glowing with pride. Thomas cleared his throat. His voice was low, unpolished, but honest. "I don't have rings," he said. "I don't have a name that's ever meant safety. But I've got this land, this porch, this fire that sometimes burns too low. And I've got you if you'll have me. I want a family not out of duty, but because I choose it. Every day." Evelyn's throat ached. She reached out, taking his rough hand in both of hers. "I don't need silver or safety," she answered. "I only need home, and I've found it with you, with her. I used to be the woman no one chose." But today her voice wavered as she glanced at Lily's beaming face. "Today I am part of a family." They sealed it with a kiss beneath the sycamore tree, Lily's humming, carrying like music as the sun dipped behind the hills. That very night, Evelyn's labor began. Thomas paced the cabin, fetching water, boiling towels, his heart hammering louder than any rifle shot he'd ever heard. When the moment came, he caught his son with hands that had once known only the weight of a gun. Now they held new life. Exhausted, Evelyn cradled the child against her chest, her eyes glistening with both pain and joy. Thomas bent close, tears catching in his beard. "You are not a mail-order bride," he whispered to her. "You are my choice every day." The baby whimpered softly, then nestled into his mother's arms. At dawn, Lily tiptoed to the bedside, climbing up carefully to peer at her new brother. Her eyes widened with awe. She leaned close and kissed his tiny cheek. Then she looked up at Evelyn, her voice hesitant. "Mama, you picked me too, didn't you? Even if I wasn't born from your tummy." Evelyn's breath caught her heart swelling. She gathered both children into her embrace, kissing Lily's hair. "Yes, my darling, I chose you. Your daddy chose me. And now we all choose each other. Always. No one's left behind here." Thomas, standing by the window, looked back at them, his family, and smiled a soundless but certain vow in his eyes. Outside, the garden rustled with the wind, lavender and yarrow swaying gently in the morning light. For Evelyn, the moment held the truth she had waited her entire life to discover. Family was not made by bloodlines or by contracts scribbled on paper. Family was forged by choice, by courage, by love that refused to surrender even when the world turned its back. Life has a way of branding people with names they never asked for: unwanted, unworthy, not enough. Evelyn Harper had carried those names for years. Thomas Granger had buried his heart to keep from being wounded again. And Lily, a child too small to understand. Loss had asked a single question that bound them together. Can you be my mommy forever? From that moment, everything changed. The lesson their story carries is simple but profound. We are not defined by the past others place upon us, but by the love we choose to give and accept. Family is not measured by who shares our blood, but by who holds our hand when the world is cold. It is the daily choice to belong to one another again and again. So, if this tale touched your heart, if you believe in second chances and unexpected beginnings, in the kind of love that grows from ashes into something whole, then let their story remind you none of us are truly unwanted when love is chosen. Tell us in the comments, what does family mean to you? And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss the next Wild West love story where broken hearts find their way home.